It's very gratifying to see an absolutely packed auditorium. So we are delighted with respect to the interest that this occasion has created. My name is Nikola Skelkottas. I am the chairman of the Hellenic-American Cultural Foundation. Let me begin by welcoming you to what should be a really and truly memorable evening. We have many distinguished guests, but I do want to recognize one guest in particular for what he has accomplished in developing Greek culture in New York. Our Consul General, Koutras, has sponsored each year at the consulate over 30 exhibits of different art forms. He is probably the most prolific producer of art exhibits of any consulate of any nation in New York. So congratulations. I must admit I haven't been to all 30, but I do try to get to as many as I can. As you know, the foundation was organized 8 years ago to promote high quality and relevant educational and cultural programs and events for persons interested in the rich history and legacy of Greece. Its mission is to engage the community, to explore and to rediscover the importance of Greek contributions. Tonight elevates this mission to a new level. We have an exceptional program, a program that is innovative, scholarly, and far-reaching. Tonight's event emanates from the artist, Stephen Antonakos, who had a spiritual but down-to-earth vision, which was developed, inspired, and nurtured by his Greek heritage. We are honored to have with us two titans of the art world, Dr. Helen Evans and Robert Storr, to discuss and provide explanations of the important contributions of Stephen Antonakos. Dr. Evans is the Mary and Michael Jaharis Curator for Byzantine art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she installed the first galleries of Byzantine art at a major museum. Dr. Evans is a renowned scholar and has held a number of award-winning and groundbreaking exhibitions on Byzantium. In this connection, I do want to mention that Mrs. Jaharis is with us tonight. She has been a dedicated supporter of the arts and a consistent sponsor of this foundation, for which we are deeply grateful. Robert Storr needs no introduction. He is one of the most revered art critics, educators, and curators, and has taught at many major educational institutions. His reputation in the art field is legendary. We also have with us tonight a musician, Edith Corman, who will perform on the piano conceptual connections with the artist. Our master of ceremonies, of course, will be Naomi Spector Athanakis. I also want to thank Naomi for putting together this evening's event. In addition, I want to thank in particular two directors of the foundation, Peter Bezos and Marilena Christodoulou. They devoted many hours to make sure the logistics were flawlessly planned and implemented. Let me remind you all to please turn off your cell phones. And now I will turn over tonight's event to Naomi. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Helen Evans, Rob Storr, and Edith Corman. There can be no better minds and sensibilities for new considerations of Antonakos' work. And heartfelt thanks to all the many, many friends who helped in so many ways. If I listed them all, it would take all evening. Antonakos was a modernist. The Byzantine echoes in his work were not intentional, but cultural, and so very deep. He was a humanist. He lived in the real world. His work emerged from his trust in his own individual, non-verbal, non-intellectual, physical, rhythmic sources, as did the work of Matisse, Mondrian, many more. In his own words, here he is as an artist. I'm quoting. I believe there is human meaning in basic abstract forms, in their specific proportions and placements. I want my work to reach the inner person. My work is real things in real space, no illusions. Again, in his own words, here is the man. I am a realist. I am quite aware of today's and yesterday's injustices and losses. The goal is to live with energy, to fight the tragedies. And his means were gentle ones: geometry, light, space. Page 2. Okay. We begin this evening with Edith Corman, a musician and a scholar of strong and fine sensibilities. She will play a selection of Nikola Skelkottas' piano pieces for us, while we view on the screen her selection of images from various periods of Antonakos' work. Please welcome Dr. Corman.
I am delighted to present the music of Nikola Skelkottas tonight. He is a composer that most classical musicians and Greek people do not know him. He was a student of Schoenberg, but he didn't follow the traditional 12-tone system of Schoenberg, but he invented his own system. And his music sounds on the cusp of tonality and atonality, which is the reason why his music is so beautiful. He wrote a very complicated way of writing, and he wrote in 4 steps, like an orchestral piece, not like a piano playing, which is normally 2 steps of writing. And it created a very thick texture. And to this very thick texture, he wrote some transparent and beautiful melodies that are going through the texture. He also used an excessive use of pedal, almost breaking the boundaries of using the traditional way pianists play with a pedal. The most interesting thing that Skelkottas actually about him is the fact that even though he was an incredible violin player and a fantastic pianist, he has never performed nor heard his own music. And there is an advantage and disadvantage to that practice. On one hand, he didn't need to compromise, and he could write whatever he wanted and the way he wanted. But on the other hand, his music has never gone through the acoustic test of how the music sounds, the test by him and by the audience. He felt at the time that the Greek people were not ready for his music. So he showed it only to one person, Papaouanos, who was an architect. And when Nikola Skelkottas died, Papaouanos picked up his music from the drawer, brought it to America, handed it to Gunther Schuller, who published it, edited it, and recorded it with me, the 32 piano pieces. So tonight, I'm going to play 5 short and not so short pieces. along with Antonakos' art. The first piece is called Little Serenade, and it's about 3 minutes, and it will be paired with Chapel of Saints, opening the doors to both artists. Then followed by a very short piece called Children's Dance, paired with my favorite Pillows of Antonakos. Both pieces are playful and childlike. Then the third piece is Intermezzo. It's kind of a Chopin-like piece, lyrical, lash, and it's paired with the untitled work that I call The Leaves. And it goes with the squares and dots in orange and blue. The fourth piece is Catastrophe in the Jungle. It's a crazy piece. It's like kind of the way we feel nowadays. It's about chaos. And it's paired with the red and blue lines of Antonakos. The last piece is Lullaby, my favorite piece of Skelkottas, very lyrical, melancholic. And it's paired with Miami Walls. And there are elements of repetition in both pieces. Skelkottas has an ascending and descending minor third seconds throughout the pieces. Dee-da-dee-da, 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 dee-da. And then the Miami Waltz has circles and squares, both intimate statements stated publicly.
Now, Rob Storr will present a broad consideration of Antonakos' work through many decades, many kinds. And then Dr. Evans will illuminate us regarding the relationship to Byzantium she has found in his work. Please welcome Rob Storr and Helen Evans.
In approaching this, I had, many thoughts. First of all, I knew Stephen for a long period of time, not terribly well, but well enough. And I knew his work very well. We were introduced by Robert Ryman, who I knew before, and the similarities and the friendship between the two of them is very clear in my mind as a kind of touchstone for everything. There's a phrase that I used in a catalog of Ryman that I wrote, which comes from Ezra Pound, which is it is the quality of the affection that carves the traces in the mind, dove sta memoria, which means literally what it says, plus where memory lies. We will set aside Pound's various and sundry problems and just consider that this is a profound phrase. And the quality of the affection that carves the trace in the mind is literally the case in the drawings that Stephen made. It is present in the neons that he made, but it is overall a characteristic of what he was like and what his art is like. Now, one of the parts of his work that is least well known, and of course the things that we tend to see are the neons. That's the tendency within mid-20th century art that he belonged to, and yet there's much else. He actually begins in the age of assemblage, which is in the mid to late 50s, and there are marvelous works of this kind which sort of do painting over but differently, do it with bits and pieces of shapes that are cut out or appropriated or whatever from other sources. And it's the moment of Rauschenberg, it's the moment of many other people who are piecing together an imaginative universe out of the actuality of things. And when Naomi spoke about him being a realist, he is absolutely a realist, as was Bob Reitman. So it's interesting to see a realist approach geometry, which is, of course, we know, largely comes out of the imagination. And comes out of the imagination and was at one point allied with Platonic and Neoplatonic thought, which suggested that geometry pre-exists us, and the best we can do is to summon it, but it will always be better than anything we can summon. I would question that. I would say maybe it is precisely artists who make geometry. There is no geometry in nature per se. It is a construct that people have thought and that artists have used and deployed and have made physical. And it is the physicality of geometry that interests me in the work of Stephen. And that physicality is of a very special nature. It is almost not there. It is almost at the limit of physicality, yet it is very much so. A thing that you can touch or see with your eyes, which is to say to touch with your eyes. If you take, for example, the many drawings that he made in colored pencil, of which the most obviously unique are the ones that are made with multiple leads of color pencil, but the ones that I like the most myself are the solid blocks of color. And that may be because I've struggled with the same set of issues as an artist. And to watch somebody go over an entire surface of vellum and lavish on it his attention and care, his affection, to create a color which scintillates, which moves, which is transparent and at the same time tactile, that is really extraordinary. He does it as the setup, if you will, for putting some kind of shape. But the shape exists as much for the surface as the surface for the shape. And that's something one should not forget. Now, in these drawings, in the initial versions of them, he explored all kinds of permutations of cubes and of geometric forms that we know. And this makes me think of another aspect of his work, which is not the assemblage, but his packages and his pillows, but particularly his packages. This was a project that he undertook in the early 1970s when he was on an artist gig someplace in the West. And he solicited from friends of his back in New York. It gets lonely out there when you're on the road as an artist. Solicited packages from them and also made packages that he sent to them. Now, the intricacies of this exchange are more than I can account for. I do know that they were timed for being opened. In some cases, they were timed never to be opened. And there are images of the artists themselves opening them or the recipients opening them. There are all kinds of conditions, and it was a conceptual product. But again, conceptualization is only the first step. The reality of the project was its materialization, its perceptualization, if you want to call it. So that's the space in which Stephen did his work. He had ideas, but he made them manifest, and he made them manifest in whimsical and also exacting ways. So these packages are one of the contributions he made to the art movements of the 70s, but I think in certain ways that they are a paradigm for how we should think about his work. There is a body of work wrapped in a package. We know it incompletely, and some people don't know it at all. And there have been a wonderful book done by Irving Sandler, who is my friend and colleague and so on and so forth, although much my elder, who did this. But there needs to be more. There needs to be more attention to all the variations of things that Stephen did, so that they will be as well known as that of his peers. A package sent by Solowit, a package sent by Robert Ryman, and then surprisingly enough, a package sent by Joe Brainerd, who is an artist of an entirely different sensibility and circle, and yet part of Stephen's extended network of friends and relations. Now, these packages unfold, or were meant to be unfolded, opened up, emptied out, and some not. And when you look at the neons, the early neon drawings and the early neons, that's essentially what you're seeing as well. You're seeing geometry expanded, geometry allowed to become open and extend out into space. There was a piece that he did in San Francisco, which was a box, or a room basically, from which come all kinds of neon tubing in geometric shapes. And it makes me think again back of the Platonic idea. If Platonic idea suggests that geometry is implicit in reality, Stephen's task was to make it explicit and make it also slightly but not entirely immaterial. Because if you put a neon out in open space, it radiates light that cannot quite be grasped, that extends beyond the confines of the tube. And the tension between the thing you know is tangibly real, palpably real, and the thing you see, which is real in another way, which is optically real, that's the tension, that's the space in which his imagination operated. So I see his work in those contexts, and I see one more thing, which is that he basically was a very spiritual man. And I am not actually a very spiritual man, but he persuades me of some of the things that I am disinclined to believe. His churches, of which he made, not chapels, not churches, the chapels of which he made a great many during the latter part of his life are spaces for contemplation, are spaces for experience of something beyond us, and they are in effect like the boxes that he made that contain secrets, and the secrets open out, in this case, architecturally and also optically, because in many of those chapels, he used light sculpture or light panels in lieu of the kinds of iconography, or literally icons, that you would find in a Greek Orthodox church. Now, I have been in just one of these things. It was at the Venice Biennale in, I believe, 1995, where he did a chapel with ladders. And it was a huge container-like structure made of heavy metal with a portico that was covered with crosses. And you went in, and there was a kind of Jacob's ladder-like thing that went up out of it as high as you could see, pretty much, or at least as high as you could imagine. Now, it was an unlikely thing for the Venice Biennale. The Venice Biennale is a carnival. Having been the director one time, I can tell you that honestly, I even sold the tickets. But the thing of putting a spiritual space in the middle of a carnival is interesting in and of itself. It's a gesture of seriousness and also of challenge, but it's also a humanistic gesture because he understood what the competition was. He wasn't trying to upstage the other things. He was simply trying to give some place for that which he cared about most. So this particular piece I encountered when I was walking along. There's a sort of long avenue to the side of the Giardini, and I was just decompressing, and I was walking along it, and I found it. I didn't know that it was Stephen's at the time. I knew him, but I didn't know this project. So I just came upon a place, and I thought, what a wonderful place. What a nice place to be. What a nice place to think about. What a nice place to think in. So if you take the aggregate of his work, his body of work is a package of which there are many components. It's a place to think in, and it's a place to experience the world through the act of thought and the act of perception. And it is an act. It's a thing people do. You don't just perceive passively, you perceive actively always. And then as you unfold, as you unpack, you find all these different things hidden in the container. All these extra things you didn't know he did, or in fact you didn't know that anybody had ever done. So I would just kick it off that way and say, what we're here to do is to unwrap the package one more time, and I hope that there will be further unwrappings, and I hope that other people will have a chance to kick in and say what they experienced and how they experienced, if not here, then in the things they write, in the things that they do in exhibition practice, and so on down the line. This is a sort of happy Stephen Day, and there should be more.
Rob knew Stephen far earlier than I did, but somewhat like you, I knew Stephen through his art before I realized that the art was associated with him. So when we were working on the exhibition of 1997, The Glory of Byzantium, I was in the offices of Alpha Bank in Greece, and there were these two wonderful images with neon, and I thought they were the essence of what icons were, and I knew a Greek artist had done them, but I did not know it was a Greek-American artist, and did not find out about it for a while. But what they immediately reminded me of was a specific movement in the Orthodox world, the Hezekiah Movement, which is a theory that if you contemplate correctly, breathe correctly, repeat the Jesus prayer, any of you can, or me, or Rob, can experience the divine light that Christ saw when he was on Mount Tabor, and God recognized him as his son, as Moses and Elijah are flanking him, and Peter, James, and John are in fact falling back from the divine radiance. It's overcoming and overwhelming them. And this particular image that I'm showing you is from a manuscript of 1370 made for John VI Catechizunus, who was the man who led the way to approving of the legality of the Hezekiah movement. So this has to be as close as I can give you to how they thought they could draw, paint the experience. And one of the things that I find fascinating is the color harmonies are colors that Stephen will refer to, and then you can see these geometric shapes. So even in this work, the idea that geometry has a divine meaning, and that Plotinus, Neoplatonic philosophy in general, as it goes into Christianity, we will be told that Christ is the light of the world, and at least two of Stephen's icons, as he moves from abstract names to more concrete names, are named Christ is the light of the world. I don't know that Stephen ever saw this. I don't know if he overwhelmingly cared, but Irving Sandler, whom Rod referred to, described how when Stephen went to Greece in 1988, so about the time that these works began to get more specifically Christological, that he he expressed his interest in the various metallic colors the icons had, their chromatic ranges, their exterior and interior shapes, and how these various geometric forms intensified their religious sanctity. And he seems to have returned from that experience and sought to interpret it through what he's already been doing this period throughout his life of making the essence of something. So he's a realist, but he's a realist in the sense, to me, of bringing it down to the most essential element. So this is St. Demetrius, which was done in 1989. So after he has been to Greece, after he's had the opportunity to see a large number of really wonderful icons, which is not really something you can do easily in New York City. The Mary and Michael Jaharis galleries now have a very nice gallery of icons, of which still do not have enough elegant, wonderful painted ones. But before then, the churches were not filled with icons that would necessarily have inspired him. St. Demetrius, as all of you know, is a warrior saint. He is the patron saint of Thessaloniki. He is martyred. He's a great aura of gold. The golden light that you find in the mosaics of churches, or maybe even what Stephen would have thought of as the very essence of what one would reduce an icon to. Naomi told me that Stephen liked to read lives of saints, so that he found in them something that not only reached back to his childhood, but involved him in the current time frame of his life. And then, as Rob was talking about, he builds these chapels, and he describes them as being peaceful until the one that I will end with, which is the one you ended with, the chapel in the Venice Biennial. And this is one of them, which, as a Byzantinist, they immediately make me think of the huge mosaics in which the donor is standing with the model of the church, whether it's Justinian or Constantine or whoever. We have these models, and this is as if he's taken that model and made it three-dimensional. He's taken the design that we call the cross and square, because you have 4 columns, and then you read the cross out from it, and made the cross the essence of it. Tom Matthews, who was my thesis advisor and a friend of Stephen's, talked about how these, and Stephen himself talks about how they echo rural, small churches in Greece. But they also refer, I think, to larger and more elaborate ones, whether indirectly or through photographs he saw. And what I particularly love about this particular one, his chapel of St. John the Baptist of 1991, is the exit door. You can see where I'm pointing. And then there's a large gold rectangle. And I think that what Stephen is offering you is the image, or the essence of the image, that is usually over the exit door of the church, and that's the choemesis, the Christ descending to earth to take the soul of his mother to heaven. She's usually laid out, and then he's standing vertically, so it usually is a rectangle. And of course, the essence of it is the gold of heaven that she's going to be taken to, the divinity that is surrounding her, and usually, of course, the background of the icon. And then over to the side is a red square, and as you all know, you can animate icons by putting them across the angle of 2 walls. It's done here. And this red square may very well refer to others who have talked about Stephen's interest in the Russian Orthodox artist of the beginning of the 20th century, Malevich, who famously did a black square. Whether he cared about that here, he certainly cared to make this an activated icon by its placement. And maybe the red color is, in his mind, a reference to Christ, whose sacrifice is often shown in red. So you have a work that on one hand is totally abstract. I think if you have no grounding in orthodoxy, you probably go in and think those are really interesting Mondrian-esque placements of color squares. But I think he was giving us, to him, the essence of the church, the figure of whom all churches are built around, the man who sacrifices his life for us, and then the mother who is the way we can pray and approach Christ, and particularly Christ at her dormition. These are just such beautiful things. Here's another view of it, so you can, the squareness of it is emphasized. What in a real church you would have an exterior wall containing it, so it would be a cube, but it's been stripped to the very essence of it. And then just a year or so later, Stephen does, in 1992, this angel. And he's moved, for whatever reasons that are driving him, from the smooth gold, almost gold of a tesseract, certainly the gold of an icon cover for these squares on his images, to paint and a rougher surface, and he is displaying it for you against a stone wall. So there's a movement away from what maybe was a sense of greater gentleness into something that's surprisingly aggressive for a man whom I remember is just being incredibly gentle. And this image becomes part of what you saw when you were listening to the music in the beginning. This is a chapel of the saints that Stephen did in 1993 on the island of Rhodes, where he spends a number of months, and he appears to have been pretty lonely. He didn't have a lot of people to talk to. He takes this arched, vaulted area of a fortress of the 14th, 15th century that had been built by the Crusader Hospitallers and turns this section into, in essence, a small church. And he has a rough floor. It's deliberately not made smooth. The walls are rough. It was never a finished plastered surface. He installs a series of icons, of lights, of neon with surfaces on them. Almost all of them are named for saints. The building is dedicated to the people who died in the fortress over time and to saints who had suffered. What I, in looking at this for you all, found most amazing is the red arc at the back, which probably seems to be just a stroke, a free drawing element. And that would have been, I think, what it would have been more in his earlier works when he's trying to work with geometry and make forms. But here he's given it a name, and he's called it the hand of God. And if you all think about icons and manuscript illuminations, and we'll see one before the talk is over, you often have an arc up at the edge of the image, and God as Christ is within it, or a large, weird-looking hand is sticking out of it. So God always has a big hand. But Stephen seems to have made this illusion quite specifically because it's exactly where it would be in manuscript illuminations and icons. So he is, and again, he's taking a complex decorative element that is theologically very important in Byzantine art. He is drawing it down to the very simplest, which then again makes me wonder if the red of the neon is a reference to Christ. That these colors are both colors he enjoys working with, but he's also very aware of how they can be read in a non-religious, Neoplatonic way, but in these works that I'm talking about in a religious way. What this lacks for a Greek church is it has no iconostasis. But in an image that he had of 1996, it was as if the rectangular cross-shaped thing had become the barrier between the congregation and the apse. If you look hard, you can see that the red light of the neon is actually a cross. And so that you are looking at a barrier, which could be a real iconostasis. What goes behind it, of course, is the enactment of the Mass, of the sacrifice of Christ made real for man now. Whether Stephen took it that far or not, I don't know. I asked a number of people whether Stephen talked about or read about Byzantine things much, and they all said to me, Stephen asked you what you saw in it. He didn't really like to tell you what he wanted you to see in it. He wanted to know what you saw in it. And that, let's see if we can get it to where we're going. There. That's where this room chapel, so not the models that we both like, but the model made large in a museum in Boston. And in it, the image on the back wall is from 1983. So Stephen has gone back to his abstract titles. That is neon behind white surface, but he's really asking us to contemplate it and to see what we see in it that makes it more than just a geometric pattern. And I feel like when I'm looking at this that I'm actually taking part in the Hezekiah divine light and that he wants us to feel like we've gone almost into the neon that is behind so many of these images. And these are those subtle color chromatic ranges that you would not think Byzantine icons had, but they really do have these. They are amazingly pink and blue where you don't expect them. And he loves angels, or at least the ones I like are often named angels. So in 1996, this is a golden angel. And here, if you look at the gold surface ground, because it's panels, it really strikes me as being the gold tesserae on the apse, the domes. Think of the interior of Hagia Sophia, that he perhaps is really deliberately referencing, that he's not just using gold this way because it's what he can buy, which is always something you should consider. And this gold is reaching out to us through the yellow neon behind it. So I wonder if by the end Stephen himself went back, as he does in the Room Chapel, and look at these works of an earlier stage and think about whether he was having a more religious meaning to them at that time than he, being an abstract expressionist, was willing to admit in the 80s. And that's perhaps a question that somebody here could answer. This image is one that, according to notes that we have, Stephen discussed with a group of monks. Because in 1996-97, as we were preparing the Glory of Byzantium, we had gone to the holy monastery of St. Catherine at Sinai, balanced between Asia and Africa, and pretty thoroughly nothing there. And when we went there, they generated their own electricity. There was seriously nothing there. And for the first time in the monastery's history, as you all know, they agreed to lend some of their works, and they came to New York, and they came escorted by several monks. And the monks were taken by Tom Matthews, I think, because Tom was a link in all of this, down to Stephen's gallery. And he was pleased that when they looked at this icon, they discussed it with a sophistication that he had perhaps not fully anticipated, and enjoyed the discussion. And one of the icons that came to the Glory of Byzantium was the Heavenly Ladder of St. John Climax. And this is a depiction of one of the sources for the Hezekiah Movement. St. John Climax was an abbot at the monastery in the 7th century, when the armies of Islam were taking over the Sinai Peninsula. He is asked to write a set of rules guiding how one could achieve a spiritual life, when I suspect you're worried about what armies are going to attack you not very far away. In his book, The Ladder of Spiritual Ascent, takes you through a number of steps. And you can see in this image another source for the ladder in the Venice Biennial. But if you look at the upper right corner, you've got the ark that Stephen has in his chapel in Rhodes, except, of course, here, Christ representing God is reaching out to the topmost figure on the ladder, who is St. John Climax, and right behind him is the donor bishop, and one of the sins you're supposed to get rid of is pride, and that very large figure suggests that that man has not totally achieved that yet. And then you have a whole series of monks, and some of them are being pried off the ladder by these adorable little devils that you ought to be scared of, but you're not. And down at the bottom, you've got a group contemplating how they are ascending. This is painted about half a millennium after St. John Climax writes, and 200 or 300 years before the transfiguration we saw at the beginning of my remarks. So it's compelling evidence of the continuing importance of St. John Climax's work, and that Stephen might very much respond to it. You've got the gold ground he must have seen in all the icons in 1988, and he seems to have responded to quite intensely. And if you were to do the contemplation that allows you, as St. Gregory Palamas described it, to get to heaven, you would be contemplating, looking, and you would be praying to Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, over and over and over and over again until it becomes a chant and it becomes a way to kind of free your mind. And that image seems to have been at least one element. Some of it seems to me to draw on the room. The interior of it was a rough stone floor, so that goes back to the work at Rhodes. The metal that it's made of seems to go with the steel, painted steel that the Rhodes images move to. The crosses on the entrance are the 12 apostles. The larger one is Christ. And then what I find utterly fascinating is he builds a ladder of the right number of steps to match the steps of St. John Climax. But at the top, he begins to separate them a little further so that you know how hard it is to get to the top. And of course, when you're at the top, in sunlight like here, you are in divine light. You're in the real divine light. And whether Stephen, who said he wanted this work to make you think of repentance, where his church models in general were to be peaceful and thus in a way calming, fully achieved everything he wanted in it. As a Byzantinist, I find this a very compelling combination of a tradition that we know he touched when he spoke with the monks from St. Catherine's, and of the abstraction that he worked with throughout his career to try to create the essence, which is what Hesychism is after and what Neoplatonic thought is about. So that whether I fully understand how Stephen would have wanted me to be talking tonight, and I regret I cannot promise you I do, I certainly have great admiration for his moving through an essence to get to the very core of things, and then at an older age in his life, and apparently perhaps driven very much by his trip in 1988 to Greece itself, he begins to fuse the religion that he was raised in, to the extent he ever went to church, with the ideas he had worked with as a New York City artist. And it seems to make him, maybe how he conceived of himself, as both very much a New York City American and as an Orthodox Greek. So thank you very much. It's been pleasure.
We thought it might be nice for you to see, after all this, Stephen, 1 minute and 20 seconds of Stephen.
One of the things that I notice about the drawings is there's such great attention to the direction of the marks and how they build a shape.
On the vellum, yes.
Yeah. They're very delicate drawings.
Those areas are, for me, very, very exciting, because after a while I lose, my mind is not really doing it, but my head is following itself around the large areas.
When someone invites you to install in a room, did you have an instant idea of how you might do it?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
You hit it on the nose. It's either outdoors, indoors. I have an instant. I walk into a space and something catches me.
Okay.
Something tells me this is what you're going to do, or where, or even color. And that happens outdoors too. Usually, most of my clients are good about it. They let me select the site on a building or an area. Then I walk around several times and look what's happening in the neighborhood or the area. Within within a day, I know what I want to do.
Here we are talking about an American artist of Greek extraction, born in Greece, came here, who made work in all these media, and we're talking about all these topics. If you tried to give him a label, you would not talk about these topics. You would sort of be stuck, minimalism, neon, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is that really important artists, and Stephen was one, open up categories, force us to change our frame of reference and expand it. In a world which is multicultural, that includes every culture that's not present in the conversation, and not just the ones that are the most hot-button political ones, right? So to consider the role of Greeks in American culture, and to consider Greek orthodoxy in contrast to all the other religions we sort of take for granted, is really important. And I applaud the fact that this is done, and I think we need to do a lot more of it. It would sort of clear the air to talk about the real variety of human and aesthetic experience.
Thank you very much.